Hi, everybody. It is day 8, and we are so excited to be with our colleague Jim Burke today. I first met Jim when I was introducing Dawn Graves at NCTE. And at the end of the session, this man walks up to me, who I have no idea because I don't know who anybody is. This is 90s at NCTE. And he introduces himself as Jim Burke, who is working on a book about creating like a planner for teachers. I don't remember the name of this. What was it called, Jim?
The Teacher's Day Book.
The Teacher's Day Book. I bought them for my department, people in my department, year after year after year. Well, all of a sudden it dawns on me as I'm talking to you that you are the author of English Teacher's Companion, which I have been buying for all of the English teachers, but it didn't connect when I met you. And all I can remember is that you took me really seriously. I hadn't written anything. I didn't have any plans to write anything. I was just really engaged with thinking about teaching. And you asked my opinion because I was mentoring all the new teachers in my district about what would they want in a planner, and you were sketching it out. And I just was so honored by your attention and kind of your goodwill in the profession. Like, everyone has a part of this conversation. So you've always been someone that I've looked to treat others with that kind of joy and respect. So welcome.
Thank you. That's such an interesting story for a number of reasons. That, like, I didn't know you were going to tell that story. I thought you were going to talk about when we went hiking with Dawn, because first of all, just that idea of being taken seriously. When we're coming into the profession, I know that you two, function very much in the same way, in that sense that, so we're all the age that we are and the stage we are in the game of it. And there's always this question these days, like kind of looking over your shoulder, like who's coming along behind, who are the new writers, who are the new thinkers. And and I think like we were we were that next generation coming in behind, Nancy and Dawn and these other people, to kind of pick it up and start writing books. And when you are, like, I'm working as a mentor writer at Corwin. They've started this program with new authors, where when they feel they need it, they'll say, like, okay, like, Jim, would you be comfortable working as a mentor with this person that you tried to bring into the company for a book? And when you really listen to the insecurities of people, there's always that idea, like, oh, it's other people that write books, it's other people, not me, right? My idea is not special. And then when you have somebody like us or anybody else that says that's a really interesting idea, that validation, it's such a small but influential act, right? That's probably how it started for a lot of us. But it's also super interesting that you mentioned the planner, because the book that I've spent the last couple of years working on is an entirely new concept of that planner. That was more about personal and professional balance. Now I've just reconciled myself to the fact that that's not achievable. So,
good point.
so the new title is "Don't Even Try." No, but then so I really wanted to come back around and work with something like that. That was, can you design a planner that's really designed to just help you improve your teaching? I mean, it's got a little bit of personal balance stuff on the side, but is it possible to bake into a planner, almost a little bit like Stephen Covey does with his planners, kind of those guiding principles. And that's, I've worked on that for like 4 years now. I've written so many different drafts trying to figure it out, and it's just a fascinating challenge to kind of wade into the nuts and bolts of our work, right?
I love that idea. I'm looking forward to reading it. I mean, and what would this be? Book 31? You've written so many books.
Yeah, something along those lines. But I mean, you guys, as well as I, like, nobody learns more from our books than we do by writing them, right? Like, I think when I first started writing, people would think that all this stuff and you write the book, and the truth is, it's like I wrote that book so I could learn all that stuff.
Yeah, let's play with that idea a little bit. I mean, my first Jim Burke memory was a Kate conference. I think it was in like 1920 something, and you know,
1920.
and I'd read some of your early work, and I was at some reception. I was unpublished at that time, and echoing Penny's story, I was like kind of thunderstruck when I met you. And then, your idea that the actual writing of books kind of shapes and forges your thinking. Penny mentioned you had written over 30. I have an entire, I think I put your kids through college, Jim, because I just grabbed like 10 of them off the shelf, and some of them, are really posted, noted it up quite a bit. One of my favorites is What's the Big Idea?
That's one that I probably love the most.
So it's interesting, over 37 years of teaching, you've written 30 books, and I'm kind of wondering, where is sort of where, if you go back and look at your early thinking and now you think about where you are today, like maybe in the world of reading. Let's start there. What's a shift, or what's your current thinking about in when we think about reading?
I'll come back to that question in a second, but the thing when you tell that story about Kate, which for those who are outside of California is the California Association of Teachers of English. I think it's we were talking before we started recording a little bit about this. It's so interesting to look at these formative experiences and the communities that we become a part of. And, I think it's so interesting to watch the way you and Carol Jago and I and a few other people in California, and then Penny, you've got like the New Hampshire thing, that sense of a community, so like you meet a guy like Don Graves, and then he says, "Oh, what are you thinking about?" And really tell me more about that. And suddenly you're in the conversation, right? And you weren't even necessarily looking to join it, and you hadn't kind of calibrated your ideas in relation to others, and then you suddenly have somebody like Linda Reef saying, "That's so interesting. I've never really thought about that," and you're thinking, "Really?" And so that those conversations at conferences, with somebody like the two of us, right, or Carol Jago, like we all started. My whole relationship with Carol Jago grew out of the first articles that I wrote that were showing up in Education Week and Educational Leadership, and I got an actual letter on paper maybe from Carol Jago, because it was like right on the cusp of email saying, Jim Burke, I see this name all over lately. Who are you and what's going on, and tell me what you're reading. And like my whole, a 30-year relationship with Carol Jago, as an influencer, grew up out of that. And I may have said, "Well, I'm not reading anything because I'm too busy teaching." And she said, "Give me a break. Like people make time for what they think is important." And that, nobody's had a more powerful influence on me than Carol, as in terms of my relationship with reading. Carol and Bill Clausen, and Kelly probably knows Bill, and that sense of community, right, and getting involved in the organizations and those conversations is just profound. So when it's also interesting when you show those books, and I totally appreciate the fact that you kind of singled out What's the Big Idea, because one of the things that people don't know too much about, I think, and I'm sure you would both agree, is the people behind our books, the editors, right? And so that book, What's the Big Idea, is the best example of a powerful editor-writer relationship that I'm, in my own experience, with Lisa Luedeke. Because I gave Lisa, who'd helped me finish a new edition of English Teacher's Companion, and I gave her like this binder full of all these different lessons and these different things, and the idea was like, well, okay, now next book idea, what about kind of working with all these things that I actually use? And she went through that whole binder and then brought it back to me with a million post-it notes. She said, "No, what's interesting is the thinking that leads to all these," right? She said, I want to know what informs, what's your process like, and that led me into writing that book. And so I think when you have a great editor, like I know you guys have worked with all sorts of wonderful people, they really help you think about your work from an angle that you maybe didn't. It's like they hear it differently or something.
Oh my God, Jim, Lisa was the editor for Right Beside Them. And she
Oh,
was
was she?
given to me after Lois Bridges left Heinemann, who had been my editor for the first 3 books. And I did not want to work with her. I didn't want to work with anyone. And boy, the million Post-its and the mentorship that she provided in helping me figure out what was my thinking. You're not kidding. An editor is so important. And I love that you're doing some mentorship in that area with all your experience publishing. I also don't want to neglect to mention in your bio that you started the Ning that I believe ended up with like 20,000 people in it, English teachers.
It was actually like, I think at its end, it was about 60,000.
Oh my word. I didn't know there were 60,000 English teachers ever. I didn't know we were that large a community. Wow.
Well, we're all over the planet. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what you begin to realize when you really, go literal on the World Wide Web. Like when I started it, I came home from NCTE. Kylene had set up a Ning for the conference that year. That's where I learned about it. And I thought, there's all these new young teachers that can't go to the conference, and there should just be a way for them to be in the conversation. And I literally created that thing in 15 minutes because it was just drag and drop. And I said, it's just going to be for new teachers. And then by like the second day, I'm getting people who are librarians in Australia wanting to join. And I thought, well, okay, why wouldn't I want them to be on there, right? And there are teachers in Israel that I still get emails from regularly, about things. So,
Wow.
we are part of. I mean, English is the subject that kids take the most of in high school, right? And it's very global. So, but anyway, so that question that you asked earlier about kind of what's the idea that runs through all those things, I think it really is that idea that runs through what's the big idea, which is just which I would kind of sum up with Arthur Appleby, a wonderful mentor, him and Judith, both of mine, of curriculum as a conversation, right? And when I listened to one of your earlier shows with Donna Lynn, so much of it was about the conversation that she's having, that books are allowing her to have with her kids. The two of you jumping in, in that conversation in your own books about making room, right, for that conversation. Like we're always worried about time, and so sometimes the most radical act can be to simply say we're just gonna make room, to do this reading or have this conversation because it's really what we need to have a conversation about. Or what do you want to have a conversation about with the kids? And so that act of making space for conversations, written, spoken, etc., is, I think, what continues to come back. And the most recent really compelling examples of that in my classroom. So now I teach at a school called Middle College, which is still the same public school district that I was in, at Burlingame for 28 years. The Middle College program is up on a 2-year college campus, and the kids are still high school students when they're in my classroom, and I'm still just a regular high school junior English teacher. And then they take their regular American history, and then they leave, and all the classes they take, they walk out my door and they're on a college campus, and all the classes they take the rest of the day are whatever classes they want to take for college, sociology, philosophy, kinesiology, whatever, math class they want to take. And so, that space that I'm teaching in now allows for just a whole new range of conversations. So the book that we just finished reading is Exit West by Mohsen Hamid, which is just an amazing book. What's her name? Gia Tolentino wrote a review of it in the New Yorker, said a book that is instantly canonical because it's so good. And right as we started reading it, it's about migration and a million other things. Right as we started reading it, it should be in that part because all your color-coded blue books are right there. Cue the color.
You got it. I was like, I just saw that the other day. It's an amazing book.
It's a real problem. Don't go there, Jim.
Oh, okay. Wait. Jim, your background is a little Newkirkish. You got so much stuff going on in that office. It's
yeah, talking about mentors and influencers.
Yeah.
So right when we started reading Exit West, which if people aren't familiar with it, they should read it. But it's just about world migration, right? And people wanted to get out of countries, and it's kind of written in this generic, non-specific way to the country. Ukraine starts. So I come in on like the first week that we started reading that book, and I said, this is just so sad and so compelling. Like, this book is beginning about people migrating, and this week, like 100,000 people have suddenly been forced to migrate out of the Ukraine because of this war. And the way the war was being described, like Putin shutting down the means of communication, would be mirrored in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So we started having this, this conversation about, like, what is the conversation this book is inviting us to have about migration. And that was the closest thing I've had, I think, in my experience to, like, the real world intruding upon your classroom. And we followed, like, I would come in each day and say, so, okay, a week ago it was 100,000. Now 3 days later it's 330,000 migrants. And by the time we got to the end of the reading that book, it was up to like 2 million people within 3 weeks, and all the different things that had played out. People talking about technology and being able to maintain connection through cell phones. So that conversation, through books, through images, through documentaries and things like that, and like really creating this textual conversation in the classroom. That was like one of the more remarkable experiences I've had, because the world, unfortunately, was just so powerfully, cooperating with kind of aligning itself with that unit. And so it led to, I had the kids in book circles discussing that book, and thank God we're back in person. And the kids just really, enjoyed that unit a lot. I think it was a really powerful experience because we could bring in articles from the paper.
Mm-hmm.
There's a documentary that just came out on HBO about kind of following 5 migrant families in different, from different countries, and that offered kind of another way of looking at that story. So
What a great question, Jim. What is the conversation this book is inviting us to have? That is such a powerful question to ask of any book you're reading. So
it gets to the so what question. We're reading the book, so what? I mean, the best teachers I've ever had could take the book that we're reading and make it, make that connection to the relevance. Otherwise, why are we reading a book if it's not making us smarter about today's world?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's another wonderful question. I think this comes from Mark Edmondson in his book about maybe his book just about teaching. And he says somewhere towards the end, he says really at the end of the day, the only question that we really ever engage with as readers is, what does this book have to teach me about how I should live my life? Which, again, like it's a beautifully broad question that sort of says, what, there isn't a meaning of this book that I can test you on, like, did you or did you not get can you answer the question of what Hamlet is about? It's what did you get out of this experience? Like, what are the conversations that it gave you a context to have, conversation to have, with yourself? And I think that's something that you both talk about a lot in your work and in these conversations is, who owns the conversation, who's determining what you're going to talk about, and if the conversation is already predetermined, right? Instead of like, what is this conversation inviting us, this book inviting us to have, then it's sort of like a game that's already been played,
Becomes
Mhm.
performative.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then it ends up seeming, I mean, first and foremost, as you guys know through your own work and experience, it just takes you out of your own curriculum itself, right? Like you're just doing reruns, right? And there's no hope of you, learning anything from your own teaching, from your own classroom, because like, oh yeah, this is a great unit, it works really well every time, and I can go on autopilot.
Mhm.
So that idea of coming at a book, from some different angle each time, or bringing other books kind of in conjunction with it. uh, the other thing about the conversation, well, just quickly, that one of the favorite things any of my students ever said about me, that kind of relates to what we were just talking about. I had this guy, that Sam Intrader, who sat in the back of my class for a year, doing his PhD at Stanford in engagement. He ended up writing a book called Tuned In and Fired Up about
Mhm.
it all. And so he would take kids across the hall after class and kind of debrief with them, like, you don't usually talk, but you were really into it today. What was going on? And this kid, one time, he says, it's so weird, Mr. Burke talks about books and reading and all this stuff like it really matters. I just thought, I just thought that was like, I love that, right? Because it does, right? But like with that kind of teenage befuddlement, like, it's so weird, like it's not just a book, right? So I think that idea of the conversations that books are allowing us to have, the last set of books that I'm trying to kind of complement the U.S. history class. So we're kind of engaging in parallel play, in that respect. So they do a lot of stuff with Vietnam era and the 60s. And I think we're all trying to figure out how to broaden our conversations in our class to include more voices, more perspectives. And so when I came into this program that I'm a part of now, on this middle college program, the titles were not that diverse, right? They were like Cuckoo's Nest, great books like Cuckoo's Nest, and a couple others that aren't coming to mind right away. And our school is really diverse. Like, we have 90 juniors and 90 seniors, and they are probably the most diverse program in our district. And so during COVID, the first year of COVID, there was some money available for books. So I ordered Exit West and They're There by Tommy Orange, and Beloved, and they used The Things They Carried in English, which is I mean, just a great book, period. But it's about the Vietnam War, and it's from the perspective of an American guy writing about his experience in the war, and and primarily as a white man. And I have a lot of Asian students in my class from kind of all different Asian backgrounds. So I just thought we really need to bring some other perspective. So I got The Refugees, a collection of short stories by Viet Nguyen, who is just a remarkable writer. So to put those, so I thought I need kind of somebody responding, kind of in conversation. So you have like Tim O'Brien's book, or his short story, How to Tell a True War Story, which is, where he's talking about, how, a true war story somehow managed to capture the beauty of war, and this, that, and the other. And then Viet Nguyen has a piece that's written in response to that, called something like On Telling a True War Story, where he says things like, the beauty of the story depends on which side of the bullet you're on. If you're in the place that the bullet is going towards, it's not so beautiful. So putting not just the kids in conversation with books, but the books in conversation with each other is, I think, is something that you both emphasize in a lot of different ways in your own work. And that's, I think, bringing those voices in, some of whom are disagreeing with each other, is really an important part of that inquiry, right?
I love that. You know, Jim, I was working at the Hong Kong International School and Pat came over with me and we went to Hanoi. And probably what struck me more than anything we had a tour guide that stayed with us and all kinds of things, was their relationship to that war. How many
Yeah.
people I spoke to who they hold no animosity towards Americans. And in fact, the woman that we were with sets up tours between veterans from that war, from the American side, who want to come to Hanoi. And she sets them up with people who were in the same battles
Oh,
at the
really?
same
Oh, wow.
time. And they have conversations. And she says it's always
Oh,
about
wow.
forgiveness and community. It is not about holding on to, you know, the losses. And I think there's just so many opportunities for that kind of healing on the planet.
Wow.
I'm also struck by, maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but Jim, the approach that you just described is so opposite of that teacher who has to teach that book because I've always taught that book and this is my book to teach and I'm really good at teaching that book. And so therefore I'm going to teach that book. You know, it's sort of that dichotomy between teaching stuff and teaching kids. And what you're talking about is being very responsive to who's in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, one of the things that I think we have all been challenged to think a lot more about in certainly in the last couple of years is just kind of the radical empathy of teaching, right? I mean, the kids that I'm teaching this year are fundamentally different from any group of kids I've ever taught. You know, these kids are juniors who who had a semester of in-class, in-person learning before they ran off into quarantine. And so they showed up this year in August as kids who have effectively experienced high school from their bedroom on Zoom. And we had our first high school dance in 3 years a week ago. And that was the happiest high school dance I've ever seen in my life. And I say that as somebody who just hated high school dance. And even then so that was March 25th. On March 25th, because we had this photo booth, I realized that I had not seen about 45% of my students' faces until that night.
Yep.
So this far into the year, right, having still not seen, you know, this much of kids' faces, and it's shocking how much information there is in the bottom half of your face. And so just the relationships with kids, right, with themselves and with each other, and with the emotions, and you know, so that act of empathy and the conversations that kids need to have, you know, like we talked about Exit West this year, we talked a lot about the extent to which the kids themselves feel, you know, unmoored from place, in the same way that migrants often do. I mean, you know, a number of my students came here as migrants in various situations as well, but the you know, you're just not ever teaching the same class twice.
Oh, so true. And I love that idea of how much you are still learning and still engaged and still noticing and responsive after 37 years in the classroom. And I know that part of the reason we wanted to talk to you is you're retiring from public education. But could you just, as we're coming to an end, tell us a little bit about what's next for you? Because we don't want you to lean out of the conversation of teaching. So what are you going to do?
First, I'm gonna get my daughter's wedding behind us.
Yay, Nora! How exciting!
And I know, very, very exciting. And one of the more tricky writing assignments, you know, is like just yesterday I started kind of my initial brainstorm for my wedding speech, and that's just its own unique genre, right? Yeah. So I've got books that I'm continuing to write. I've got kind of a number of books that I've wanted to write that I really haven't had the context for. And I think as I mentioned at the beginning, like this planner that I've been working on. So its title, I think, is going to be Better by the Day. which is a title that I really like. And I prototype these things, right? So I mean, like, here's my use of it, because if it doesn't work for me, it's certainly not going to work for anybody else. So I really like kind of design problems, in that sense. I find it kind of interesting to wade into our experience of our work. Um, I think my emphasis is I'm looking to build a couple projects that I can really stay with over the term. So like I imagine being able to kind of revise this planner, and kind of keep trying to get it more right each year through a series of drafts. And I really like that idea of something that I can commit to, for the foreseeable future. And then the Norton anthology that I wrote, Uncharted Territory, which I just love the work on that because, oh no, I just have to read a lot to be able to, find the readings. I mean, you're like for a unit which has about 12 or 14 readings in it, poems, essays, and things like that. I probably start with a stack of about 50 pieces that I want to choose from, and then winnow it down, and then I get it to like 25, and then it goes to my editors, and we have a conversation, and so again, that rich relationship with editors is a great one. So that's coming out in its second edition this year, and that's a book that I look into the future for the next 10 however many years ahead, and love the idea of just really devoting myself to the reading that will go along with that. And then I've got this new project that I'm just really beginning to get off the ground with Penguin Random House now, in terms of curating classroom libraries. I think one of the things that all three of us really share is obviously with Penny, with the Book Love Foundation, it's just not just a love of reading, but a deep belief in the transformative power of that, right? Like nothing, I got out of high school, to the best that I can recall, having read 2 books, and only one of those was in school. It was Bless the Beast and the Children, and so I grew up a non-reader, and only when I went to college did I kind of catch fire on that kind of stuff. And I look back on moments and just the role that reading has played in my life, and there's just nothing that has played a more formative role in helping me shape my identity. And once I really began being a reader, so the other big thing that my students do is they engage in a year-long research project on some deep topic. They've got to read books that they choose on their own, and the role that the teacher is in a position to play is that they themselves are a reader. I know you guys talk a lot about that in the other talks with Donald Lynn and others, about just the teacher as a reading mentor, right? Like, oh my gosh, have you read this book, The Body Keeps Score, right? Or have you read this book Columbine, right? About this, or have you read this book by Peggy Orenstein about social media and girls and things like that, and that the role that plays in your own credibility as a teacher is just immeasurable, right? But also to be able to, so when I think about not being in the class, I think it's one of the things that I anticipate missing the most, is simply being in that conversation with those kids, where a kid is telling me about something and I say like, oh wow, like I don't say, oh there's an app for that, I go, there's a book for that, right? And just really proselytizing, I guess, in the name of literature, so much of which goes back to that collection of letters, like I Hear America Reading, that was just kind of a total accidental book early on, but asking people 25 years ago to write and tell my students what role reading played in your life, because my kids don't think it matters, and getting over 1,000 pages of letters.
It's a powerful book. I love that one, and I love the letters to new teachers, where you had the student teacher give you a question a day on a note card and you answered it. I bought that for years for all of our new teachers, because you were just so generous in your advice and your support and your own scholarship. I think, Jim, the thing I've admired about you always is how deeply you read and think. And work. I don't know if anyone can outwork you. How did you produce 30 some books in the time that Kelly and I have written? I don't know, 8. Same length of career, but you're just like, wow. So I don't know that we could talk to you forever. But this has just been a delight. I sure hope we're going to see you in Anaheim. NCTE says we're going to be live. And I know that it's something that I've missed in these last couple of years, is just hanging out with you for a cup of coffee, sharing some.
Well, that mentorship idea that I talked about earlier, actually, I'm hoping that it's going to come, because they haven't sent out the acceptances. But it's a young woman in Texas, Carrie Rowan, who is writing this book about working with African American adolescents and reading, and she's an administrator, and she was a teacher, and she's has a couple of those people at home, and so she just has such a rich experience. So I asked her to let's write a presentation together, a proposal together, to kind of mentor her into that process of presenting, right? Because you've got to get out into the world and talk about your books and share your ideas. And so it's been very interesting and eye-opening experience for me to work with her through that experience, and realize how many things I've been able to take it for granted when you put yourself out there in the world, that African American writer, teacher has to think about, that I do not. When you put yourself out there more in the public. So she's been a wonderful teacher to me of going through this experience.
That's awesome.
Well,
I'll definitely be at that session.
I hope we go full circle, Jim, because Kate is in Monterey this year, and so 35 years later, let's meet again, and let's definitely
hang
out.
Well, my son lives in Monterey, so that's always be a happy excuse to go down and see him. So
awesome.
Always.
Well, I'm grateful. I just want to end by saying I'm so profoundly grateful. We've had some remarkable conversations over the years. We're all pretty much the same age, and we've got kids that are pretty much the same age. And I think we all kind of came into the writing of these books and this work at about the same time. And there's nobody that I respect and appreciate more on the journey than the two of you, and the conversations that we've had over dinners or standing in the hall. And that one time we presented at NCT was really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, that was great.
It was great.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Okay. Take care. See you guys, everybody.
We'll see you
We'll
see you
see ya.
tomorrow, everybody. All righty.